So I'm really pleased to have here with us today Sharon, Ament and Chris Bonner. We're going to be hearing about the fantastic Museum of London project. To give you a bit of background, Sharon is the director of the Museum of London, and she's in charge of moving the museum to this ambitious new site in West Smithfield. Chris, he's currently working for the City of London on the co-location of its wholesale food markets. He's also leading the architectural thinking on the transformation of the Grade 2 listed East and West market buildings at Smithfield. He's also supporting Central Futures Limited on London 3.0, which is an inquiry into the next iteration of London, focused on big questions regarding culture, transport, housing, economic development, and so on. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Sharon.
Thank you very much. Well, great to be here, everybody. I'm certainly going to be talking about the new museum for London in this exciting wider context of a whole new cultural district called Smithfield, which is located within Culture Mile in the City of London. It is an extraordinary project altogether. In 2015, Grayson Perry announced that the Museum of London was minded to create a new museum in this evocative 24-hour part of London in West Smithfield. It's truly a remarkable site. And since then, we have been working hard to a crescendo moment in June this year, when we received planning permission for this project, which you see before you. It inhabits a Victorian general market, which hasn't been used for 30 years. It is across the way from an extraordinary 1950s, 60s building built by Arup, the poultry market, that wonderful green roof you can see there. And it is opposite a fish market, a cold store, a set of buildings known as the Annex. So this campus of buildings, which sits alongside Farringdon Road in the centre of London, is part of a vital and vibrant 24-hour area, which currently has a wholesaled meat market that opens at 12 midnight and goes to bed around 9 a.m. So it's a truly remarkable 24-hour district. A number of small restaurants all around us, the fabulous Fabric nightclub, London's oldest hospital, St. Bart's, and much, much more right in the centre of London. It's extraordinary. And it's provided us and our design teams over these past years with the building itself has provided us with this and helped shape our project. And it's been a really iterative process, which has enabled us to articulate it in some really powerful concepts with a strong vision that really positions this as the centre of London in a shared space. And what we're finding is that this set of market buildings, which spills out into the street, is extraordinarily adaptable to create what I think will be the most extraordinary museum around, simply because it provides that connectivity, permeability for our audiences and the public that many museums are seeking to do. So here's the buildings today, more or less. Lots of work is happening on them. And as I said, they've been unused for the past 30 years or more. So we started to explore with our design team what we could do. Here is an aerial view, and you'll see the West End side under the title Museum of London, which runs alongside Culture Mile. And Chris later on is going to be talking about the two buildings and the wider environment in which the new museum sits beside and within. What is really important here is to show just how close the Barbican Centre is, and also Farringdon, which will be an enormously popular crossrail station connecting to all airports of London. And as I often say, just 2 just 2 tube stops away or train stops away from Paris or Amsterdam. And here you can see the kind of connectivity that I will be talking about a lot. The museum will have, up to 5 or 6 entrances or even more. And this is quite extraordinary and has enabled us to make a museum which will be adaptable, flexible, never ending, and go into a kind of 24-hour way of being. Again, I would argue like no other museum that I know. Looking more deeply into the plan for the building, you can see how on the ground level, the building kind of works. It's got an east and a west wing, and it's connected very simply by the street, which is called West Poultry Avenue. And we want to keep that street as much of a street as possible, even though it will be our main entrance. And this is the market when it was first conceived in the Edwardian period. It was conceived in the Victorian period, but here it is operating in the Edwardian period, and here in the 60s. It has had a vibrant life, and today many people can remember visiting the markets or the restaurants around it, either as a place of work or simply as a visitor. And here it is today, the external facade of the general market, the inside of the general market. We have been busy reshaping these buildings, analysing them, dissecting them, thinking about how each component part could go towards creating a new museum. And what's going to be so extraordinary is that when our museum opens around about 2024, there will be 4 generations of people working in the space. And this mix of generations, which in fact reflects our audiences, will bring an additional vibrancy with all of the different ways in which we will be working together. It's a really exciting project. This is our mission. And of course, everything we do at the museum needs to fulfill this mission. And this mission is, of course, really driving the new museum. But we have added to a mission which has been long-standing, our desire to be a force for good in London, as we think London must be for the world. That is a challenge, an aspiration, a never-ending position to always try to do good. We want to do this as a museum, and we believe society is demanding of that now, of us now more than ever. And of course, as I said already, we want to be and aim to be London's shared space in the middle of it all. In creating a museum, we are working around 3 dimensions: time, people and place. And of course, our museum is about London, but London's impact on the world and the world's impact on London. We go back to when early humans started to inhabit the Thames estuary, and we go right into the future. And we're always, always about people. We're structuring our content across the spaces that we have in a time dimension. And each one of these spaces does something different, and it does something very innovative. And extraordinarily, we have a live train line running between our spaces. And here they are, as conceived by the architects and designers. And these images change and develop over time. Our project objectives are driving everything we do, from our business plan to how we connect with people, to reducing the operational costs, to being environmentally governed. This is a really powerful project. Our design team is led by Paul Williams of Stanton Williams, with Asif Khan, Massif Khan Associates, and Julian Harrop, who is the world's most fabulous conservation architect. Together, this team with many, many others are crafting and creating a museum. And we're engaging with London in the process. It's not just us. And there are many ways in which the Husseinas, the Claras, the Hugos of London are helping us to craft and shape not only the design, but also what goes in the museum. And there you can see, you know, the demands of the museum are to be true and authentic, to tell both the glorious stories and those which are less glorious, and to really think about, and for the museum to be a place where we can think about the future. We're designing and iterating, spilling out onto the streets. Atelier Bruckner are currently working on the big pastime galleries, which will be extraordinary, deep, including many, many objects. Here are some images of our time. This is always changing. It won't quite look like this now, but this is the sense of intent, a really busy place in our time where the world comes together for large-scale events. In the poultry market, we will have a special exhibitions gallery, Contemporary Time. And on the top of that, next to all of our offices, will be Future and Imagine Time. Our museum's time dimension really does think about all the possibilities for London. And right in the basement of the poultry market is the evocative Deep Time with the London collection. Not a sleepy, dusty collection, a collection which is used by researchers, by people, members of the general public who want to explore London through its material culture. There are ways down into the buildings and the ways out into the street. And it will hold such enormous and wonderful things as that we are collecting today, as well as deep time collections. So things such as the Fatberg, for which we have become notorious, or today, which has just launched this week, really wonderful exhibition called Dub London, about dub reggae and London's role in creating this music genre. Or how's about London Calling, where the Clash, or in the 70s, kind of through the kind of feelings and ethos of London, responded with this landmark album and music. Or through things such as archaeology. This is a recent discovery. It's currently on show in our Museum of London, Docklands Museum, the Havering Hoard. So we have objects, people, artwork, ephemera, all sorts of things in our collections which will be on show, as well as oral projects such as our own Brexit bus. And throughout all of this, we've been discovering new things. We found a whole area, a set of vaults which nobody knew existed. That's there in the screen. And on the other side, you can see this wonderful Victorian cocoa house, which is part of the temperance movement. We stripped away the 1960s paneling, found these glorious Victorian tiles, the original ones, and we of course will make that into a cocoa rooms and sell the best cocoa in London. And here you can see not only inside the museum but facing outwards, there's the opportunity to have new sorts of shops, to rent spaces out to new to organizations who want to participate with us. So the museum is not just a place for itself, but is a place where we have other organizations. And we certainly go out into the streets. And Chris will be talking about that connectivity between all the sites and the street scene, which is going to be really important. And some ideas here in the design for the annex building, which will provide a really enormously wonderful connectivity with the museum. And you will see here that graphics is starting to really play a big role. Here we have the biggest sign of London on the street. People will be able to merge inside and outside through the shop faces that face the street on the museum. And as I said, graphics will play a big role, harking back to those Victorian days. And here are some images in which we, the museum, will start to play out on the exterior of our building, ideas and concepts. This could be Black Lives Matter, not just a sign for the museum, and so forth. So using all elements of the that is given to us in the buildings around us. And we will inhabit these streets. And this is what they're looking like now. It's a glorious opportunity for us to reshape a part of London. We'd love to hear your ideas and questions as we go into this really evocative space, Culture Mile, which spans a whole area. So now I'd like to hand over to Chris, who will tell you more about the rest of the project.
Okay, well, thank you, Sharon. Amazing project, amazing presentation. I'll try and do yours justice as well. So to jump straight in, it's not just me, Chris Bonner, working on the wider Smithfield transformation. There's a huge, huge team of experts supporting us. And we're a bit behind the curve compared to where Sharon's got to with the museum project. So we already started thinking about the wider transformation of Smithfield earlier on this year. Appointed Studio Egrat West, architectural firm, to help think about the other Smithfield buildings, which I'll come on to in a minute, the East and West market buildings, but also the transformation of the public realm, which is being led by another team, Hawkins Brown. And of course, there'll be some characters that some people might recognise here. Alan Baxter Associates, actually based in Smithfield, our heritage experts, all the way through to a very innovative organisation called This Must Be the Place, which is thinking about cultural programming. I'll come on to that too. So I'm not going to go into the geographical context of Smithfield because Sharon did that very eloquently, smack bang in the middle. But I guess I will just give you a quick context on the wider programme that this presentation sits within. So it's called the Markets Co-Location Programme. And effectively, what the city is under is an Act of Parliament to run London's wholesale food markets. So Smithfield, Meat Market, why we're here today, Billingsgate, Fish Market, and also New Spitalfields Fruit and Veg. And we're scooping them up and moving them to a co-located destination in Dagenham Dock in East London, London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, to secure their future, but also to release the existing sites for other reinventions of themselves. Whilst the positioning of Smithfield is really important in Sharon's last slide, Culture Mile, it does go beyond that as well. I would wager that quite a few of us have been to the Tate Modern, skipped across the Thames to St Paul's, what a lovely experience, and then stopped and gone home, rather than gone the same distance to Smithfield. So I guess the challenge really is for the city more broadly to reinvent itself, not only as the financial powerhouse district for London and the UK, but also this awesome cultural destination, showcasing a huge millennia-year-old legacy of buildings and institutions. So this presentation mostly focuses on these buildings in orange. So the grade 2 star listed East and West market buildings. This rotunda thing just to the south of it, with a lovely ramp that leads you down into this mysterious basement space. It's rather magical. I would insist that you go down there and have a look if you haven't already, because it's this amazing underground world. But my inverted commas project and Sharon's do sit within this wider context. So the buildings, and there are other buildings too that the city is looking to develop, need to be stitched together by a coherent public realm. And that's what we've been working on also from the beginning of the year. Now, the strict limits of that public realm is the purpley bit of this diagram, but clearly where people are coming from, the influence on the strategic road network, desire lines, pushing over into, we're not looking at boundaries in terms of boroughs, we're obviously pushing into places like Islington with our thinking. That's the more amorphous orange blob that goes around the immediate focus. And like I say, having a single vision, even though elements will be delivered at different times, is the key. So whilst we might go down to the detail, we will go down to the detail earlier of how the public realm will work around the museum spaces. What they need to do is make sure that whatever we do there can be coherently linked with the market spaces, which will come a few years later, because like I say, we're a little bit down the line. And really for the buildings in particular, it's a real challenge to get this right. I guess as the current custodians, all we can do is make sure that the next iteration is good for the next generation before it evolves again. And that's kind of the beauty of Smithfield. It's yes, it's known for a place of food for the last 150 years, but for 800 years before that, it was something else. And it's constantly evolved and changed. It's been a place for trading, a place for exchange. More recently, the 100 years of Bartholomew's next year. How about bringing the fair back? So, and there are all these historical links as well, like cloth fair historically, maybe with the future of fashion going forward. And just a few words to put on the screen here that resonate with me anyway, but also with our audiences that we've been talking to. Gritty is a nice word, and I think sums up the market pretty well. And we want to maintain that authenticity. It's a big buzzword over the last couple of years, and it's really challenging to achieve that. But we know that's the ultimate goal. They're really hardworking, little bit chaotic places, and I wouldn't want to lose that in whatever iteration we have going forward. Buildings look like they might be quite easy to read, like they're big tents basically, but they're not. So when you begin to dive into the detail, they're actually really intricate and really very interesting spaces that I can't possibly do justice to in this presentation. But I guess to say, a lot of the innards of the building were scooped out in the 90s to meet modern regulations. And whilst that's sad because you've lost some of the historic physical content, it does mean that as long as you keep the skeleton, you preserve the skeleton of the structure, enhance that, there's actually a great opportunity to do loads inside the buildings. There's always a shout out to the architect, Sir Horace Jones, for his 152-year-old buildings, but the engineer was a legend as well, Sir John Fowler. As I mentioned, the basements before used to be served by railway tracks. They are rather wonderful, so we have been exploring those a lot recently too. And so whilst we have lots of different ideas about what these spaces could become in the future, they could even be a complementary medium-sized museum, who knows. One thing that has really got traction and we are seriously looking at is this destination, this international hub, the creative industries to come together to service their local communities, London more generally, but also that international audience. So you could imagine this combination of design, art, fashion, film, even emerging industries like gaming coming together under one roof with food right at the heart of the offer. I'll come on to that a bit in a minute. Creating, I guess, that new visitor destination in the middle of the culture mile would allow new jobs, potentially 1.5 million visitors a year. But what it will really do is allow the city to showcase its talent, new technologies and innovation. I appreciate you won't be able to see all the detail on this slide. You don't really need to. What it is mapping out the different uses in the local area. And I think hopefully what you can pick up by the picture is the variety of colours, as in the very diverse, probably unique mix of uses that surround these structures. So when thinking about place and placemaking principles, we have 5 or 6. I'll whiz through now. Clearly, this needs to be a place for all Londoners. It needs to be open, accessible, this inclusive metropolitan destination space that people want to come to, they want to linger in. Got to be this connected campus. So we've obviously heard about the General and the Periphery, the East and the West, the Rotunda. They need to work together in this connected Smithfield campus, but they also need to relate to their institutions. I mentioned St Bart's, you've got the Charter House on the corner, you've got the Haberdashers. There's a really rich mix of uses in the broader area. And I, like Sharon, think these should be 24-hour spaces. Now, I'm not necessarily saying we're going for Fabric Mark II, but you could imagine quieter eating spaces for, say, shift workers at Bart's, whose lunchtime is at 3 in the morning. Also, I think it's really important to reveal the historic structures. So they've been filled up over the years for operational reasons. That's totally fine, and we know why that's happened. But actually, now we've built this what's called a BIM model, 3D model that you can interrogate. You begin to see actually the layers of history within the structures and revealing them, in particular the roof structure. Being up close to that roof structure is an amazing thing. I mentioned food, that's one of the place principles. this will be at the heart of the Grand Avenues offer. And we want a very different offer to food in the wider area. So we see almost like an agri farm in the basement, the opportunity to grow on site, to prepare on site in a cook school, to sell and actually consume, all within one ecosystem. A lot of words on this slide, but basically what we're saying is we want this to be, if not one of the most sustainable Grade 2 star listed buildings in the square mile. A difficult task, but one we think we can do. We've already started an audit, like a materials audit, like a passport. So as things are removed, we can reuse them or dispose of them appropriately, for instance. And then the last one, this principle is meanwhile. So whilst, for me anyway, I need to go through a private bill, I need to build a new market, and then the meat traders need to agree to move out before we can do any of this transformation. We're starting that journey now. This is why it's such a great opportunity to present today. But we can also start that journey in areas of the building and areas around the building that aren't required for operational purposes. This is a rather provocative image of a part of the basement too being turned into an art installation or fashion show, for instance. So I just want to whiz through, there's about 10, and I'll be quick, interventions that unlock these opportunities, that allow for these different flexible showcasing spaces. The first is points of vertical circulation, basically being able to get up and down the building. It's not the easiest thing at the moment, so we need to make sure that this is a fully inclusive building. We think you can get a different experience at different levels. So these rather lovely gantry areas, which maybe this sketch, don't have lovely CGIs just yet, but I hope the sketch begins to give you an idea of how you can interrogate and experience the buildings at different levels that you can't at the moment. There's an idea, if you think of what we call an historic cruciform. So you have the north-south Grand Avenue and the east-west Byers Walk. That gives you 4 very large, very attractive quadrants to play with. And we think one of them, for instance, could be, probably think of a better name than multi-purpose box, but what I'm trying to capture there is it could be an auditorium space, it could be a space for local performances, it could be flexible showcasing, a cross-section at the bottom of this slide. And just some views from the model I mentioned earlier on. The building over time has turned its back to its surrounding environment. Again, I understand why it's an operational space, but that's not what we want going forward. So as well as having the Grand Avenue open to the public and the Byers Walk as much as possible, there are these rather lovely things called Carcass Corridors, and what the butchers call them, which is effectively where the big old vans dock at the moment. So you could open them up and allow more permeability and porosity to the building. And as the Victorians always did, they got it right. This is a lovely plan form that was produced in the Victorian era, and we're kind of reinventing that. Just a view of what one of those smaller, more intimate corridors look like with, let's say, an art show going on. The building was built to keep me cool. So it's great in terms of ventilation. It's not fantastic in terms of light. So we do imagine some of the upper spaces being given over to the creative industries for office space. So maybe an architectural practice, for instance, there's already practices like that in the building in its current guise. But to do that, we'll need to put more light in. You can imagine kind of atrium spaces, pouring light down into those flexible showcasing spaces at grade. You could even imagine somewhere like Bart's Hospital taking over some of these spaces for what they call a wet lab, their research centres. I mentioned the food offer flanking the Grand Avenue. We see these as kind of small objects in space nestled within the superstructure of the building, craft-led micro industries, independent offers that spill out onto this area for recreational activity. A shot of what the place could feel like at night. Quite a large intervention into the space is what we're calling cut in the Grand Avenue, which is that kind of public thoroughfare smack bang in the middle of the buildings I've been talking about. And that allows a lower Grand Avenue to be created, and it really allows the interoperability of the building. So at certain times of the year, it could be an event space for one operator that could take over the whole thing, whilst allowing that publicly accessible route through the building into the rotunda. These are very large spaces. So in the bottom right, that's Millennium Bridge either side of the cut, just to give you a sense of scale. And what the Grand Avenue could look like, with a giant piece of art coming out the middle. And as you go down those steps, you've got that box that I mentioned on the left. This is in the basement areas. So the agri farm I mentioned, kind of growing in the basement. And lighting is really important. You can really paint a canvas with lighting. You don't want to overdo it, but you want to celebrate that Victorian architecture, retain that industrial flavour, however, that grit I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation, but also embrace all the amazing projection, lighting, digital controls that you can do at the moment, and really taking a beat from what the museum has done to date. The penultimate intervention is this Rotunda Gardens. So it's a really lovely, magical place at the moment that not everyone knows it's there. It's quite difficult to get into. So we'll probably be bridging over this kind of rotunda space to make it a bit more accessible, but also creating this winter or physics garden, like maybe medicinal plants. This gives you a bit of a better view as you're down in that rotunda space. It's a really magical space with the cobbles and the warmth of the brick that leads into these arches that takes you into this basement world. And I guess a bit of a techie drawing, but effectively what this is saying is all those different interventions allow a real flexible showcasing spaces to be created. There's enough fixed elements to have that vision I mentioned earlier on, but enough flexibility to deal with a future post-COVID world. And just to end on a few hopefully lovely images of one of the halls as a fashion show, maybe an expanded Lisbon-style food offer. There's a link there. You can't click on it, I suppose, but maybe you can copy it to go and interrogate the building without stuff in it. Okay, thank you very much.
Chris, you know, I've been so delighted with how you've developed this work and how the design teams are really working closely together. And it's great to see that our projects and our kind of shared ambition riffing off of each other, actually. This is something I've been thinking a lot about, you know, kind of our projects were conceived before a pandemic, we're living through a pandemic. In developing your project, how are you finding it working in this circumstance with design teams and whatnot? It's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. I think it's really challenging because we don't have the answers yet, but we know that there's a problem. And I think maybe sometimes people would see that I used the word flexibility earlier on, and they might see that as a weakness in vision. But actually, I think there's enough fixed elements to what we're proposing at the moment for it to have coherence. But there's also enough flexibility to take accommodation of what the world is going to need in a couple of years' time, what types of creative industries will hopefully make a home here, how people need to interact with the spaces. Is it distance? Is it not? And there's a lot of flexibility in the architectural approach. So, for instance, that box that I mentioned, everything is retractable, because it's like a transformer. You can turn it into different shapes. All of the interventions we're thinking are going to be built off site, kind of prefab, and then they'll be built, and then they'll be transformed, transported to the location, and then nuzzled in. And therefore, they're very flexible in terms of actually physically moving them around the space or packing them down and shipping them out because there's a new requirement that we have in a few years' time. So at the moment, that's the way we're thinking about it, whilst trying to keep in with the current thinking on a hopefully soon post-COVID world.
Yeah, I kind of think that, and people have said to me, oh, you know, will all your predictions work? Will this vision still pertain, you know, in this kind of post-COVID world? And what I found is actually, I think the vision for our project. It's needed more than ever. This kind of sense where people come together to kind of explore big ideas, to explore what it means to be human in a sense, in a kind of very generous and free way. Would you agree?
I mean, that's a much more profound answer than mine. So, but I totally agree. It's needed more than ever. And whilst, you know, I'm flirting with different uses for the buildings at the moment, maybe we have a bit better grip on the structural interventions to open up those possibilities. One of them that I mentioned was this kind of international centre for the creative industries, which have been massively hit, if not certain areas devastated by COVID. So having this kind of vision and opportunity to look forward to emerge out of this pandemic, I think is a brilliant thing for that particular sector of the community.
Yeah, and it kind of, but it's kind of rooted always, there's all the things that you've said and the things that we're thinking about is really rooted in London and rooted in the people of London. And, you know, we know that's an international population. And the freeness of it all, the kind of public accessibility is really, it kind of just makes me tingle with excitement when I think about it all.
I think I liked your kind of multi-generational approach to who your audience is actually, and I think there has to be a focus on young people. You know, one of the things, there's a lot of thinking going on at the moment. You can't get it into a 10-minute presentation, but I'd love for the Smithfield building to be a place for apprenticeships. I'd love for it to be the first creative industries academy. I'd love a lot of learning to go on in those spaces, just as a natural part of the offer, not something I'm shoehorned in at the end.
And I think I've been really struck by the critical role that cities will play, certainly in the environmental protection in the future, but that critical mass of people all living together. And, you know, London, we meet each other on the streets. London's a very democratic space, unlike many, maybe other cities, you know, we're all there rubbing alongside each other in the tube, in the parks, or whatever, and we value this. And I think over, you know, the kind of lockdown, we've really found value in our public spaces, and we like being with people who are different from ourselves, don't we?
I think so, and that's part of the key and the challenge, isn't it? To create those spaces that you know, the city is in the middle of reinventing itself as a destination space, and creating those spaces that encourage people to come in. I mean, I won't have done the public realm justice because that is being led by another department. But if you think of the southern edge of the buildings that I described leading to that Rotunda area and then St. Bart's, that is going to become a new public square for London. And we want it to be the public square for London, where people want to come and they want to come for festivals, they want to come and experience each other, they want to have lunch. You know, there were all different types of activities within that area, because well, I for one am getting a bit bored working from home, and I'd like a nice space in central London to come and see people.
Me too. And I think I'm always blown away by the kind of richness of kind of opportunities. You know, if I think about you know, St. Bart's, we have a wonderful medical hospital, teaching hospital. There's no reason why, you know, the museum, you know, the markets, you know, the kind of spaces around us can't be both about health and well-being, but also provide, you know, a kind of a better visiting experience, or a better patient experience. You know, we've got, yeah.
No, I totally agree. We're kind of lucky, Sharon, because we have this like epic canvas of history, but also some of the most innovative medical practices in London, in the UK, in one place, and tapping into that already rich story and just giving it a new coherence and lease of life is a huge challenge, but also a really exciting one.
So here's our deal, Chris, before we finish in a minute. You and I and all of our supporters and our boards and the kind of really imaginative politicians that are here helping us make this, we've got to make sure that we really deliver on this vision of kind of democracy and cultural kind of melting pot and creativity, and really think about, stretch our own understanding of economic models that will make this sustainable into the future. I think we're both in accord.
I don't have a glass to salute you, but yes, I agree.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Well, Chris, Sharon, that was really fascinating. Thank you so much for coming along. What an amazing project. I've written down a potential title for an article.
Go on then. What is it? What do you think?
Fatbergs and Carcass Corridors.
Go on then. Do that. That will get loads of viewers.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Not to say Fatbergs and Carcass Corridors, because that will become mine and Chris's nicknames.
Exactly.
I've had worse. It's fine.
So yeah, I'm going to ask you, Sharon, before we go, are there any other museums in the world you know of with a train going through them?
No, there's only one, which is kind of in Milan Metro. There is a metro station that tried to become a museum. So it's the other way around. Okay. But I don't think it's actually ever opened. So that's the only one I know of. I do think it is a world first. You know, there's a lot of firsts with this project.
It's an amazing project. I didn't even know about that rotunda, Chris. That was extraordinary. So, and the galleries, it's just what a space that is. So so just remains to be said, both Chris and Sharon are on our platform, so if you've got any questions, do send them over. And once again, guys, thanks so much, and speak to you soon.